You bring home a fresh loaf of bread, and within a week, sometimes less, you're peeling back the bag to find a fuzzy green patch creeping across a slice. You throw out half a loaf again and just accept it as the cost of buying bread. Here's what almost nobody realizes while they're tossing that money in the trash. The exact thing that would have stopped it is probably sitting in your own trash can right now, inside a little packet you threw away without a second thought. Tonight, I'm going to show you why bread molds as fast as it does, the real reason store-bought bread seems to last so much longer than a fresh bakery loaf, and how a completely free item you've been throwing away. The silica packet tucked inside vitamin bottles, shoeboxes, and beef jerky bags can keep your bread mold-free for weeks longer than it currently lasts. Let's get into it. If you're new here, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling me how much bread you've thrown out in the last month because of mold. I think the number's higher than most people admit. Here's what's actually happening every time bread grows mold, and it's simpler than people assume. Mold spores are floating in the air around you constantly. They're not something that appears out of nowhere. They land on the surface of your bread the moment it's exposed, whether that's the second it comes out of the oven or the moment you open a sealed bag at home. Bread just happens to be close to the perfect environment for those spores to actually take hold and grow. It's got moisture, it's got carbohydrates as a ready food source, it's porous enough that oxygen reaches every part of it, and it typically sits at room temperature, right in the range mold thrives in. Take any one of those away and mold struggles. Bread gives it all four at once. Here's the detail that actually explains the difference between a loaf that molds in 3 days and one that lasts 2 weeks, and it's not really about how much moisture is in the bread. Food scientists talk about something called water activity, which measures how available that moisture actually is for mold to use, as opposed to just how much total moisture is technically present. Two loaves can have similar overall moisture content, but if one manages that moisture differently through ingredients, processing, or packaging, mold simply has a harder time accessing what it needs to grow, even though the bread isn't dry. This is the actual science behind why some breads hold up so much longer than others. It's not just a marketing story. And that brings us to why commercial bread seems to last forever compared to a fresh loaf from a bakery or your own kitchen. Most mass-produced bread contains a preservative called calcium propionate, which works by disrupting a mold's ability to produce energy at a cellular level, essentially stopping it from growing and multiplying without affecting the bread itself. But here's the part that surprised me. Preservatives are only part of the story. Industrial bakeries also operate in filtered, sanitized environments with tightly controlled air quality, which means far fewer mold spores land on the bread in the first place compared to a loaf baked in a regular kitchen or sold in an open bakery case exposed to open air all day. By the time commercial bread reaches your kitchen sealed in plastic, it's already carrying a dramatically lower initial spore count than a fresh loaf ever will, and that head start matters as much as any preservative added afterward. Now here's something worth knowing if you've ever assumed a sealed plastic bag was doing your bread a favor. It's actually working against you in one specific way. Plastic traps moisture completely, and once bread is sealed inside it, that trapped humidity has nowhere to go, slowly raising the moisture available right at the surface of the bread, exactly where mold needs it most. Paper allows some of that moisture to escape, which is why bread in a paper bag typically resists mold longer. But it also dries out and goes stale faster because it's losing moisture it needs to stay soft. That's the actual trade-off. Plastic keeps bread soft longer but feeds mold. Paper fights mold better but sacrifices softness. So here's the trick that solves that trade-off without buying anything at all. Silica gel packets, the little packets marked "do not eat" that come tucked inside vitamin bottles, new shoes, beef jerky bags, and plenty of other packaged goods you've bought recently. These packets are designed for exactly one job, pulling moisture out of the air around them. And that's precisely the mechanism that's working against your bread every time it sits in a sealed bag. Drop one of these packets into your bread bag and it actively pulls excess moisture out of that enclosed space, keeping the environment inside the bag drier than a sealed bag would be on its own, without you sacrificing the softness a fully open paper bag would cost you. Here's exactly how to do this safely, because there are a couple of details that genuinely matter. First, don't let the packet directly touch the bread itself. Place it in a corner of the bag, or wrap it in a small piece of paper towel first, so it's pulling moisture from the air inside the bag without sitting right against your food. Second, be selective about which packets you reuse. Packets that came packaged specifically with food items, crackers, dried snacks, jerky, are generally considered safe to reuse this way. Packets from other sources, particularly older ones or ones you're not sure about the origin of, are worth skipping since not every silica packet on the market is certified food grade. And some contain a blue or pink moisture indicator that changes color as it absorbs water, which isn't something you want anywhere near something you're about to eat. When in doubt, stick specifically to packets that already came from something you consumed, since those were already vetted for exactly this kind of proximity to food. One more genuinely important note here, silica gel itself is non-toxic. That do not eat warning is mostly a blanket caution rather than a sign it's poisonous, but it's still not something you want a curious kid or pet getting into and chewing on directly, so treat placement the same way you would with anything you wouldn't want in a toddler's mouth. Now, a couple of details that matter regardless of whether you're using the silica trick or not, because they genuinely extend how long bread lasts. Always let bread cool completely at least an hour or two before sealing it in any bag at all. Trapped heat inside a sealed bag creates condensation as it cools, and that condensation is essentially handing mold a head start before you've even put the bread away. And if you know you won't get through an entire loaf within a few days, freezing is genuinely the most effective option available. It halts mold growth and staling completely rather than just slowing it down. Slice the whole loaf before freezing, separate the slices with parchment paper if you can, and pull out only what you need, letting it thaw at room temperature for 15 to 20 minutes, or toasting straight from frozen. Here's something important to know if you ever do spot mold on a slice, because it's a common and genuinely risky misconception. If you see mold on one slice, don't assume the rest of the loaf is fine just because it looks clean. Bread is soft and porous enough that mold can send invisible roots through it well beyond what's visible on the surface, so a moldy slice is a signal to be cautious about the whole loaf, not just an isolated spot to cut around. And toasting moldy bread doesn't make it safe either. Heat can kill the visible mold itself, but it doesn't destroy toxins the mold may have already produced, so toasting is never a fix for bread you've already caught mold on. Here's the complete system, start to finish. Let bread cool fully before bagging it to avoid trapped condensation. Use a food-safe silica packet wrapped in paper towel or placed away from direct contact inside your bread bag to control moisture without sacrificing softness the way an open paper bag would. Freeze anything you won't finish within a few days rather than leaving it at room temperature hoping for the best. And if mold ever does show up, treat the entire loaf with suspicion, not just the visible spot, and never rely on toasting to make it safe. 2 honest notes before you go. First, this trick slows mold growth meaningfully. It doesn't make bread immune to it indefinitely, so you're still extending shelf life by roughly a week or more depending on your kitchen's humidity, not creating bread that lasts forever untouched. Second, if you're baking bread at home without any preservatives at all, expect it to mold faster than store-bought regardless of what storage trick you use. Since it's genuinely missing the ingredients commercial bread relies on, this trick helps close that gap. It doesn't erase it entirely. Hit like if you've been throwing out more bread than you'd like to admit. Drop a comment telling me if you've got a stash of silica packets sitting around from something you bought recently. Share this with someone who's constantly complaining about bread going bad too fast. Click the next video for more, subscribe if you haven't. Take care, I'll see you in the next one.